Have you been thinking of buying a property here in Vancouver, but you're not quite sure of what the closing costs would be? Well, in today's video, we're going to walk you through a general list of closing costs that you should be aware of prior to starting your home search. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So the first and largest closing cost is something called the property transfer tax, or PTT for short. So the way it's calculated is 1% on the first $200,000 of the purchase price, and then 2% on any amount between $200,000 to $2 million, and then 3% on any amount between $2 to $3 million. And if the purchase price is higher than $3 million, then that amount that is north of $3 million will be subject to an additional 2%. So it would be essentially a total of 5% on that amount that's higher than $3 million. One thing to note about the property transfer tax is this is a lump sum payment that the buyer has to make to the government of BC. Essentially, it essentially gets paid through your lawyer, so upon completion. So that is the first closing cost that you should be aware of. The second closing cost that may be payable is something called the goods and services tax, which, as you may know, is a 5% federal tax. The rule of thumb, as tax lawyers and CPAs would say, is that there's always GST unless there's an exemption. And the biggest exemption is if you're buying something that's considered resale property, or property that's been lived in and it's been occupied. If you're buying something that's resale, then in this case you would not be looking at that GST. But I'll give you another example where the GST would be payable. It's essentially if you're buying something, let's say a pre-sale unit, you're buying it from the developer, then that 5% GST would be payable on top of the purchase price. So it really depends on the transaction that you're essentially involved in. The third cost that you should take into account is the cost of getting an inspection done. So that usually happens once you've got an accepted offer, you're doing your due diligence, and typically in your offer you're going to have subjects or conditions, one of those conditions being getting an inspection done. So that's when you go out and hire an inspector, a licensed inspector, to go through the property and give you a detailed report on the condition of the property. In terms of the cost of getting the inspection done, that does vary depending on the property type and the size, but I would say budget anywhere between $400 to $1,000 to get the inspection done. This brings us to the fourth cost that you should take into account, which is the cost of getting an appraisal done. So if you're like the vast majority of buyers that need to finance their purchase, then in most cases your lender would need to get an appraisal done. So they would order it essentially just to make sure that the price that you have in your accepted offer or in the contract is in line with the appraised value. In terms of the actual fee, that does range, but I would say it should be anywhere between $200 to $400, but that is one thing to sort of confirm with your lender. The fifth cost that you need to take into account is the legal fees. So let's say you've got an accepted offer, you've removed your subjects, and you've paid your deposit, you've got a firm deal. You still need the help of either a lawyer or a notary public to do the final closing documents, actually register the title into your name and register it at the land title office. So I would say budget anywhere between $1,200 to $2,000 for the legal fees. So this brings us to the next cost, which is adjustments. So when you go to visit your lawyer or notary public to sign the closing documents, one of those closing documents is a document called the Statement of Adjustment. Essentially you're going to be responsible for any amounts that are going to be due in terms of property taxes or strata fees as of the adjustment date moving forward until the end of the year or the month respectively. So let's say the adjustment date that you have in the contract is, let's say, November 1st, then you would be responsible for the strata fees for the month of November, from November 1st until the end of the month. And for property taxes, the yearly annual property taxes, then you'd be only responsible for your portion from November 1st until the end of the year. So there has to be some adjustments. It really does vary depending on what the adjustment date is. It could be a credit or it could be a debit, but that's just one thing to keep in mind. Another cost that a lot of buyers don't take into account is called the strata movement fee. It's obviously relevant only to those that are buying into a strata, so a townhouse or a condo. There could be in the bylaws stating that there's going to be a moving fee of anywhere between $200 to $350. It's essentially just, because you're going to be sort of booking the elevator for a couple of hours, moving your stuff. There's going to be just sort of a move-in, move-out sort of fee that's stipulated in the bylaws, but that is one thing to keep in mind. So now that you've signed the closing documents, the next step would be, or the next cost rather, would be to hire a moving company. So in terms of the cost, it really depends on how much furniture you get. I would encourage you that you reach out to multiple sort of local moving companies, get multiple quotes, and go with whatever makes sense to you. Another point that I wanted to leave you with is the cost of representation. So in the province of British Columbia, if you are on the buying side, you would not be paying anything to the real estate agent that's representing you. That's because in BC, again, we have something called a listing agreement. So the seller essentially pays for the buyer's commission. So they negotiate with the listing agent, and whatever the commission that they agree on, that's going to be split between the listing agent, the agent that's representing the seller, and then the agent that's representing the buyer. So I just wanted you to keep that in mind. And just to recap all the points that we've covered in today's video, the first point was the property transfer tax. The second point was the GST, if applicable. Third point was the cost of getting an inspection done, appraisal fee, legal fees, as well as adjustments. And the final 2 points were moving company. Obviously that varies, and the strata moving fee. So that's it in a nutshell. These are all the points that we wanted to cover in today's video. If you have any specific questions, again, just a quick reminder that this is just a general list of costs. It's not by all means extensive. You might be paying a bit more, you might be paying a bit less. It really depends on the transaction. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, or otherwise leave a comment in the section below, and we'll be addressing those questions as we go. Thank you so much.